1580.
You like your style, though?
At KBLA Talk 1580, we are unapologetic about amplifying the voices of those who have historically been left out of the conversation. As we approach our third anniversary this summer, the problem with talk radio in Southern California specifically, and America more broadly, is virtually unchanged. All day, all night, all white. We make no apologies for our prime audience, but true to the best of our tradition, we're committed to expanding justice and freedom for all. So when we receive messages from listeners like Neil, we just smile.
I realize that I'm not your target demographic, but I love listening to your station as it is the only progressive station on the dial.
That's us. Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley, and get updates on X, that's formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program, or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavissmileyshow.com. That's thetavissmileyshow.com, or wherever you get your podcast, and listen to the Tavis Smiley podcast version of this program at your leisure. Let me commence by saying Happy Black History Month to you. Of course, around here, we do Black History every single day. I still ain't figured out how we got stuck with the shortest and coldest month of the year to celebrate Black history, but I'm with Du Bois. Would America have been America without her Negro people? Think about that for a second. Would America have been America without her Negro people? I think one can answer that question without casting aspersion or demonizing anybody else. And to quote that great historian Jordan Peele, nope. It just wouldn't be, right? All right, now that we've dispensed of that, here's the rundown for our first day of Black History Month show for you. I warn you, since it is the first day of Black History Month, this is a real black show. I mean, really, 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 really black. In our second hour, Ernest Krim is an anti-racist educator who actually left the public school system as a history teacher to deliver his lessons to a much broader audience. He throws open the doors on Black history, dispelling myths and celebrating heroes and sheroes through social media's engaging lens, one captivating tale at a time. In our third hour, two conversations. Up first, a premier voice on colonial oppression, Joris Lashin, who works to deconstruct colonial power structures the world over. On the B side of hour three, a conversation with Jelani Natty about Black men hike, healing, bonding, and conquering anxieties one step at a time. But in this first hour, we're going to squeeze a 40-pound show into an 80-pound bag, or an 80-pound show, I should say, into a 40-pound bag. Two more conversations in this first hour. On the B side of this hour, Miami University of Ohio professor Ann Whitesell on the power and peril of ballot initiatives, exposing vulnerabilities in representation and championing Black and other marginalized voices in a democracy that is clearly under siege. I've, on a personal note, we'll discuss this with Ann Whitesell when she gets here, but I've gone more and more weary over the years about all these ballot initiatives. I live in California. This program heard across the nation, but I'm based in L.A., and in California, we just get way too many ballot initiatives and referendums, and I'm sick of it. What do we elect y'all fools? I mean, what do we elect y'all to do? What do we elect y'all to do? Why is everything a ballot initiative? It's punting in the worst way and, frankly, exploiting oftentimes marginalized voices and people of color. That's my take on it. We'll see what Ann Whitesell says about it when she joins us later in this hour. All that said, we commence today's show with Kasim Rashid, who is challenging incumbent U.S. Congressman Bill Foster in the Chicago suburbs. But in this particular race, Rashid versus Foster, the call for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas has become an issue in this race and, frankly, in other races across the country. The Intercept did an interesting piece about this that I read and wanted to invite Kasim Rashid on this program. That's how political, think about this, that's how political U.S. policy in the Middle East has become. That a foreign policy issue, underline that, a foreign policy issue, is front and center in this and in other major congressional races. I am pleased to welcome Kasim Rashid to this program. Kasim, how are you today, sir?
I'm good, Mr. Smiley. How are you?
Please call me Tavis. You doing all right, brother?
Yeah, that's all right. I'm doing all right.
It's good to have you.
Happy Black History Month to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
It's actually Qasim. It's like awesome with a Q in front of it. Awesome Qasim.
Oh, I like that. Awesome. That's even better. Awesome Qasim. Qasim Rashid. All right, Qasim. Good to have you on the program. I'm sorry I jacked that up. I want to make sure I got your name pronounced correctly. That said, you heard me say a moment ago that, well, first of all, tell me about this district. I mentioned this in the Chicago suburbs. Tell me about the district, first of all.
It's a deep blue district that has the primary is the determinative election. It's racially diverse. It's on the Democratic side. It's about 45% people of color. And it's a large district. It's got some really developed urban areas and some really rural areas as well. And it's a district that staunchly supports ceasefire, universal health care, getting corporate money out of politics, properly regulating banks, all areas that the incumbent is completely out of touch with, and all areas that we are advancing and leading by example, and so far having a lot of fun and a lot of success in this campaign. Qasim,
tell me quickly what your opponent is saying regarding the ceasefire, and then we'll come forward from there.
Well, Illinois District 11 has long supported ceasefire, and he unfortunately does not. In fact, we've scheduled 3 debates. He committed to them, then canceled all of them. The 4th debate, he showed up last minute and then left midway through. And in that debate, he was asked point blank, will you call for a ceasefire? And his answer was, in my view, extraordinarily cruel in saying that, despite the 26,000 civilian deaths, despite the 12,000 children being killed, he responded, I do not support things that are permanent and immediate ceasefires. And the irony of all this, Tavis, is that he and I agree that Israel is violating international human rights law. He agrees that civilians are innocently being killed. Innocent civilians are being killed. He agrees. In fact, he's on record saying that, in his view, there's a special place in hell for Netanyahu. But despite all that, he refuses to have the courage to call for a ceasefire as innocent people die. That, to me, is just unacceptable.
Qasim, like awesome, Rashid is our guest in this hour. When we come forward, a great deal more to talk about. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's not often that in congressional races where people are thinking about issues that are closer to home, that you have foreign policy at the center of a race. But this is happening not just in this district in Chicago, but around the country. This ceasefire has become a major issue. The White House made a major announcement today about what President Biden is doing. He's feeling the heat. He is feeling, we talked to Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, to start this program yesterday. And in the 24 hours since that conversation, the president is feeling some heat and has made a major decision, a major move regarding the war between Israel and Hamas. We'll talk about that when we come forward. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Hope, agency, dignity. This is Tavis Smiley.
Can you dig it? Come on!
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
We all agree that America has a very serious problem.
Okay, KBLA delegation, we need your help as we launch our 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. We would deeply appreciate you going to our KBLA 1580 website and filling out a short climate justice survey, which will help us better serve our beloved community as we build out this campaign. It'll take you just a few short minutes to complete the online survey, and the information you provide us will be invaluable as we do our part to hold folk accountable and amplify the voices of our people in this climate conversation. When you take the survey, you'll be automatically entered to win seats at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. So, hit our website at KBLA 1580. Help us out by taking the short climate justice campaign survey, and you could be our guest at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. Thank you in advance for your consideration and cooperation. At KBLA Talk 1580, we care about the community, we care about the climate. We care about the climate. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hey there, it's Karen.
And I'm Ernest. We're the co-hosts of Food for Thought with Karen and Ernest here on KBLA Talk 1580. Make sure you check us out Saturdays at 8 p.m.
And our rebroadcast happens on Sundays at 7 p.m. We'll be talking about the art of dining. We'll be giving food tips, talking to sommeliers, chefs, concierges, all the food influencers, everything food, everything dining. And sometimes with some of our friends just hanging out and talking food.
And when you listen to our show, we have a segment called Hot Dishes. Sometimes unpopular opinions, but we said what we said and we meant what we meant.
Also, we do food reviews with who's hot and who's not.
Yeah, you make sure you guys check out Food for Thought with Karen and Ernest here on KBLA. We've got a lot to talk about.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. Sounds different, huh? This is Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Qasim Rashid, who is running for Congress in the suburbs of Chicago. And this is just one example of a number of races across the country where a ceasefire in Gaza has become front and center. Again, The Intercept did a pretty interesting piece about this issue and how in this election cycle, a foreign policy issue is at center stage in many of these debates of persons running against incumbents who have not stepped up in regard to a ceasefire in the Middle East. So I mentioned a moment ago that Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, was our guest on this program, one of our guests on the program yesterday. And in the 24 hours since she was here, the president has responded to the heat that he is feeling about the way he is stewarding, or not, as it were, this crisis in the Middle East. And so the headline today is that Biden imposes sanctions on Israeli settlers accused of attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. Reading now just the first couple of paragraphs from this particular article in the New York Times, President Biden on Thursday ordered broad financial and travel sanctions on Israeli settlers accused of violent attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank, a gesture aimed in part at Arab American voters in the United States who are furious with the president's backing of Israel's war in Gaza. Mr. Biden authorized sanctions with an executive order that goes further than the directive issued in December by the State Department, which imposed visa bans on dozens of Israeli settlers who have committed acts of violence in the West Bank. Qasim Rashid, it's clear that the president's feeling the heat. We'll talk about your race here in just a second, but again, because it's such a huge issue politically, what do you make of the president's announcement today?
I think it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough. First of all, there have been, I think, 400 Palestinian civilians killed since October 7th in the West Bank. right? And prior to October 7th, from January 1st to October 6th, there was about 250 Palestinian civilians killed. And so this is an ongoing issue that's been escalating without any kind of consequence. And it shouldn't have taken the atrocity of October 7th for this to create, to get more airtime or get more awareness. The fact of the matter remains that these settlements are illegal. The military occupation is illegal. And while it's an important step to protect Palestinian civilians from extremist settlers in the West Bank, the broader step that needs to be taken is to demand removal of these illegal settlements and demand removal of this illegal occupation. That's in accordance with international human rights law. That's in accordance with U.S. policy as well. It's a matter of enforcing it.
What do you make of this attempt by the president, as I mentioned a moment ago, to sort of tamp down the criticism of him in the Arab American community? I mentioned on this program in conversation with somebody yesterday that I've read a number of pieces where the Arab community, specifically, say in Michigan, a very important state, of course, in any presidential election. In Michigan, they basically said, don't even come here. We don't want to see you. We don't want to hear from you. There's basically nothing you can say or do at this point to appease us. We are not voting for you, Joe Biden, given the way you've mishandled this particular crisis. They don't even want to see him in Michigan. And as you know, there's a sizable Arab American community in the state of Michigan. So I guess the question now is whether or not you think this in any way, back to that word, appeases those voters of Arab American descent, Arab descent, who have been furious with him in this regard.
I think this is a step in the right direction, but I don't think this goes far enough. I don't think people will see this as an adequate response to what's going on, the mass death and destruction and occupation of land that's going on. So again, I mean, that's my very clear answer. This is definitely a step in the right direction, but it does not go far enough. We need to see more action for sure.
Yep. So back to your race and other races like yours where this issue of the ceasefire has become front and center. Why, I'm not even asking this, but why do you think in your district and others, a foreign policy issue is at the epicenter of these campaigns for Congress?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think, one, people are exhausted with war. I think, we're seeing the generation who grew up in the Iraq and Afghan war, now seeing the Ukraine war, now seeing another war start. I think people are tired of it, and they don't want to see our tax dollars fund these wars. Two, and probably more importantly, is just the humanitarian death toll and crisis of it all. I'm seeing support from people across the spectrum. We have conservatives coming to our event saying that they're sick and tired of the war and the killings and the bombings. We've got Jewish people, Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians working together to call for a ceasefire and demand accountability. And then three, we look at the struggles. Sure, the economy is doing better, but we look at the struggles of so many people in this country right now, right? 62% are living paycheck to paycheck. 22 million households are in a home that the rent is more than they can afford in any kind of comfortable way. Inflation is down, but that doesn't account for the higher rates of food costs. And so people see spending absurd amounts of money on these wars, and they look at what's happening locally, and it doesn't make sense. The math doesn't math, as the kids say. And that's why I'm heartwarmed to see the overwhelming response. 80% of Democrats, almost 70% of Americans overall, recognizing that this is not a justifiable war. This killing of innocent civilians and Gazans and children. I mean, 12,000 children have been killed. There's nothing that justifies this. And we can address this if we effectively call for a ceasefire, immediately release all the hostages and all the political prisoners in Israeli prisons, demand an end to the settlements, and call for an end to the military occupation. None of this is outside the realm of reality. This is all what basic human rights law wants, and I think people are being much more informed on this because they see the impact it has locally, and they want justice going forward.
When you say this issue of ceasefire resonates with 80% of Democrats, you're right about that, but not 80% of Democrats in the House of Representatives, as you well know. 80% of them have not stepped up in this regard. What do you make of the way in which the Democratic Party or members of the Democratic Party now in Congress who are seeing the same things that you're seeing, the same things that I'm seeing, they're in the same conversations, they're all running for re-election, and yet 80% of them have not called for a ceasefire? Democrats. How do you read that?
Well, I think, and this is the point that I'm making to my constituents here in this district, that my opponent, Bill Foster, has been around for 16 years. He has not been the lead sponsor of a single piece of legislation in 16 years, but he's taken millions in corporate and dark PAC money. For what end? To what end is he actually serving? And even now, you have 80% of people in his Democratic base in his primary calling for a ceasefire, and he just refuses. And so, I've always said that whoever funds a candidate when they run for office is who that public official will be accountable to when they are in office. My campaign is 100% funded by people. We don't take a single corporate PAC dollar, not one. And by the way, we outraised Bill Foster in Q3, and we got pretty darn close in Q4 as well, with more than 11,000 donations. And I just want to emphasize, Tavis, how unifying this issue is. 95% of Americans, according to polling done by End Citizens United, 95% of Americans, Democrats and Republicans alike, want corporate money out of politics. I'm the only candidate offering that. And now, when I'm elected, God willing, people will know that they have my ear, that I am accountable to them, not to some lobbyists. And so the fact that we're seeing such a massive disconnect from people like Bill Foster and constituents, in my view, is the surest sign that it's time for him to go and it's time for us to elect a new person, myself, who actually will be accountable to the voters of the 11th district.
Let's talk about that disconnect. Again, we're talking about your race in particular, but broadly speaking, the reason I'm having this conversation is because, again, this issue of the ceasefire has become front and center in many of these congressional races across the country because most of these members of Congress have not called for a ceasefire in this Israel-Hamas conflict. So the question I want to give you a chance to respond to now, Qasim, is why, in your particular race, Mr. Foster refuses to call for a ceasefire. Put another way, and you said it a couple times now, there's a disconnect between many of these members of Congress and their constituents who want to see a ceasefire. For that matter, there's a disconnect between Joe Biden and Democrats who want to see a ceasefire. What is that disconnect about? Why, in your particular race, do you think your opponent is refusing to call for it? Again, square that for me to the extent you can.
It comes down to who is funding his reelection campaigns. Look, Bill Foster has taken $800,000 from industries and organizations who oppose a ceasefire. I've taken $0 from such organizations. All my funding and support, our 700 volunteers, are all people who support a ceasefire. And that's fundamentally the problem, the disconnect with Congress right now. Congress is the only place that has an 11% approval rating and a 91% reelection rate. And it comes down to people who are extremely wealthy, extremely powerful. I mean, Bill Foster is a multimillionaire politician who's been around for nearly 2 decades, funded by billion-dollar corporations, including corporations and lobbies who want more war, right? That's how they make their money. I mean, Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, he's taken money from the organizations, from the company that's making the Predator drones that are being launched over Gaza right now. People don't like that. People are sick and tired of war and death. And the fact that 80% can tell him, sir, you need to stop this, and his response to them is tough luck, is a clear indication that he is not in a position of responding to the needs of voters in this district. We've been out at the doors. I've been knocking doors. Our team has already knocked over 25,000 doors. We've made over 700,000 phone calls, and the consistent answer we're getting is this is the first time a member of Congress has bothered to reach out to us. And we're reaching out because we believe our future, our success, rests in earning the trust of actual voters. Bill Foster believes his success rests in adhering to what billion-dollar corporations want him to do. And our very different visions and track records and voting policies reflect that difference.
Yep. Let me come back to a stat you just offered because this stat is quite telling, that Congress has an 11% approval rate and a better than 90% re-election rate. So only 11% of us think they're doing anything that's worthy of adulation. Yeah. But 91% is the re-election number. There's a huge disconnect between that 11 and that 90+%. I totally get your point. The question is, to what extent do you think then that gerrymandering is a real threat to the future of this democracy?
Oh, gerrymandering is one of the key platforms for voter suppression that exists right now. I mean, we have 535 seats in Senate and House. Only about 77 seats are viable every election cycle, 75 to 80 seats. So you're talking 10 to 15% are viable to flip red or blue because of gerrymandering. And again, it goes further than that, right? It's, because plenty of politicians say, well, we got to get corporate money out of politics, including Bill Foster. He'll talk incessantly about getting corporate money out of politics. And he even made a promise last summer that when my opponent commits to not taking corporate money, I'll stop as well. And we put out a statement that said, hey, we're not taking corporate money. Will you uphold your promise? Of course, he did not uphold his promise, which was no surprise to anyone. But, Tavis, I want your listeners to think about this point. When a politician says that we got to get corporate money out of politics, but they refuse to lead by example, what they're saying is everyone else is corrupt except me, right? That I'm incorruptible. If you're not willing to lead by example, then you don't deserve to be in a position of leadership. You should step aside and resign or retire or do whatever it is you got to do to get out of the way so people who are going to lead by example can lead by example and build a stronger democracy for all of us.
Finally, in the 90 seconds I have left here, if you are successful and you win this seat in Congress, you'll be working, of course, with the president, as all members of Congress do. What's your sense of how this issue between now and November is going to play or not for President Biden?
Are you talking about the issue of the war in Gaza?
Yes, indeed.
I think we need to see massive movement in this issue. The ICJ has given a pretty powerful ruling holding the Israeli military accountable for their indiscriminate bombing. We need to see massive movement because this is not just a Muslim issue. It's not just an Arab issue. It's not just a Jewish issue. This is a human rights issue. And I encourage President Biden, I encourage Democrats, I encourage Republicans to work together for the cause of justice and humanity. That is the path forward. That's going to strengthen our resolve against Russia's aggression in Ukraine as well. And it's going to set a precedent going forward that international law matters. Justice matters. We can't just uphold justice when it's convenient for us. We have to especially uphold it even when it's difficult. And this is one of those times. My commitment to voters is to uphold that sense of justice, economic, social, and climate justice, to demand an application of international human rights law. It's what I've done my entire career as an attorney. It's what I've cherished, especially as somebody who grew up in Section 8 housing, that we need to build a better structure for people to have upward mobility. That's what I'm committed to. That's why I hope to have the support of people listening in to help us win this election.
Listening in on WVON in Chicago. We love WVON, where this conversation is being heard right about now. Our guest has been Qasim Rashid, human rights lawyer who built his career fighting for survivors of domestic violence, asylum seekers, and low-income communities, running in this race like a few others across the country where the issue of a ceasefire has become a central issue in these campaigns. Qasim, good to have you on. All the best to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, brother.
Good to have you on. Thank you, man. More of Tavis Smiley. Just getting started on this first day of Black History Month when we come forward.
What's your quarrel with the world? You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A Pennsylvania man is behind bars after allegedly beheading his father and showing the head on YouTube. Cops believe Justin Moan beheaded his 68-year-old father, Michael Moan, on Tuesday and then showed it in a YouTube video in which he complained about the government and called his father a traitor. Moan was arraigned early Wednesday and is being held without bail. Fulton County's district attorney and the prosecutor in the Georgia election interference case are testifying soon about their relationship. A defendant in the investigation that includes former President Donald Trump claims the two have been improperly involved romantically and should be removed from the case. African Americans Fonnie Willis and Nathan Wade now have been subpoenaed to testify in court. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
Right now, there are young people across the world facing a tough choice: continue their dream of education or drop out to help their family put food on the table. You can help change their future in a single moment. See how far your support can go at unbound.org.
Is this the tackle? This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Clippers got another road win last night. They won by 16 at Washington, 31 points from Kawhi Leonard. James Harden dropped 25. The Clippers are now 16 games over 500 and have the third best record in the Western Conference. The Lakers are at Boston tonight. They need a win to get back to 500. 4:30 tip-off on TNT. The GoFundMe drive to build a new statue for Jackie Robinson in Wichita, Kansas has surpassed $140,000. The goal of $150,000 appears to be in reach. City officials want to build a new statue of Robinson to replace the one that was stolen on Saturday and destroyed. Robinson's statue was on display at McAdams Park in Wichita, home of League 42, a youth baseball league named in Robinson's honor. In 1947, Robinson became Major League Baseball's first black player. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson on KBLA Talk 1580.
We got a lot to talk about.
Hi, I'm Zoe Williams, a.k.a. the Voice of Reason, encouraging you to join me weekdays from 7 to 9 p.m. for the world's most intriguing relationship radio roundtable. Every night, I facilitate and encourage our loyal listeners to participate in the most engaging relationship discussions you'll hear anywhere. So make it a point to rendezvous with me, Zoe Williams, the Voice of Reason, Monday through Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Trust me, your relationships will never be the same. The VOR is on fire tonight.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. This is KBLA Talk 1580, home of the 2024 Climate Justice Campaign.
You're all set with your Medicare prescriptions, Mrs. Brown.
This is not just low-cost copays at Walgreens.
I can actually help you set up 90-day refills if you want.
This is having a partner you can trust. Get low-cost copays, 90-day refills, and delivery from your neighborhood Walgreens. This is being independent. Together. Walgreens.
Restrictions apply. For details, see walgreens.com/pharmacy.
We all agree that America has a very serious problem.
Okay, KBLA delegation, we need your help as we launch our 2024 Climate Justice Campaign. We would deeply appreciate you going to our KBLA 1580 website and filling out a short climate justice survey, which will help us better serve our beloved community as we build out this campaign. It'll take you just a few short minutes to complete the online survey, and the information you provide us will be invaluable as we do our part to hold folk accountable and amplify the voices of our people in this climate conversation. When you take the survey, you'll be automatically entered to win seats at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. So, hit our website at KBLA 1580. Help us out by taking the short climate justice campaign survey, and you could be our guest at our annual Black History Month luncheon, Thursday, February 29th. Thank you in advance for your consideration and cooperation. At KBLA Talk 1580, we care about the community, we care about the climate. We care about the climate. Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
Miami University of Ohio professor Ann Whitesell is our guest right about now. Let's talk about the power and peril of ballot initiatives, exposing vulnerabilities in representation and championing Black and other marginalized voices in a democracy under siege. Professor Whitesell, how are you today?
Great. How are you?
If I complained, I'd be an ingrate. I am doing well, and I am delighted to have you on this program for these 30 minutes. Let me just start with a repeat of what I said at the top of the hour, commencing our program today. That I live in Los Angeles. This program is heard across the country, of course, in syndication, but I am based in Southern California. And in California, I have just had it over the years with all these ballot initiatives and referendums, it raises a number of questions for me why we elected these public officials in the first place if they're not going to do their jobs and everything is going to be a ballot initiative. It further troubles me, as I'm sure you will opine on when I shut up in a moment. It further troubles me that oftentimes these ballot initiatives disenfranchise and frankly exploit poor people and people of color, other marginalized communities. And I'm also troubled by the way in which they engage in such trickery. The way the ballot is worded, what it's called. You think you're voting yes, and you're actually voting no. So I personally am getting troubled by the way we are increasingly in this state and across the country governing by ballot initiative. Now, that's my assessment, but this conversation ain't about me. It's about your perspective. So tell me whether you and I are simpatico or I'm totally off base here.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a lot of valid concerns. I think one of them, is this idea of we often use ballot initiatives because we're not seeing things happening within the legislature, which raises the question, again, as you said, why do we elect these people if they're not going to pass laws? That's kind of government 101. We elect legislators to pass laws, but then we turn to ballot initiatives because we get frustrated and they're not doing anything, and so we kind of want to take control in our own hands. But as you said, that is not necessarily a good thing. I mean, historically, there's been political science research on this, that oftentimes you have kind of a tyranny of the majority when it comes to ballot initiatives. There's been historically lots of civil rights measures that were voted down via ballot initiative, because when you're talking about you just leaving it to citizens, often you have a majority that it was not favorable to expanding the rights of marginalized groups. So there are a lot of concerns that come with ballot initiatives, and haven't even gotten into do people understand exactly what they're voting for? That's kind of a whole nother issue, I think, that we could talk about. But yeah, I share some of your concerns.
Let's talk about it right now. Why is it, and I'm not naive in asking this, I get it, but I want to hear your take on it. Why is it that there's such trickery engaged or involved in the language of these ballot initiatives, and people end up getting tricked?
Yeah, I think some of it is, you want to simplify things so that people feel like they understand it enough to vote. Some of it is driven by interest groups on either opposing the ballot initiative or in favor of the ballot initiative. Lots of times there's outside money, oftentimes even outside the state itself. Right? So groups that don't even represent people who live in the state are putting lots of money into these ballot initiatives. And I think if people knew all of the details, they might be kind of intimidated and might say, maybe I don't know enough to vote on this. But if you simplify it enough, then people can kind of have a gut reaction to it and say oh yeah, of course I like this idea, right, without really thinking about the consequences.
To your point about outside money, this will not surprise you, obviously, and there's no hard and fast rule here. There's no thing. This is the point I'm about to make is not an absolute. I understand. But one of the reasons why, again, I am troubled by the increasing use of these ballot initiatives in this state and across the country is because when it gets to the ballot initiative process, it's all about the money. Who has the money to buy the most TV commercials? Who has the money to buy the most radio spots? Who has the money to put the most billboards? Who has the money to buy the advertising in newspapers? I mean, who has the money to really leverage their message and trick people with whatever it is they're trying to achieve? So it really does come down to money. Now, of course, all of our politics is about money. Somebody once said that money is the mother's milk of politics. I get that. So it's all about money. But when you get into this ballot process, the money is absolutely obscene. And typically, it seems to me, my research suggests that marginalized communities are on the wrong side of that dollar, if you will.
Right. Well, and I think what you're talking about with the money is a lot of it is you have to reach voters and convince them that it's worth voting on the ballot initiative and convince them which way to vote. And like, to be honest, it's a lot of work to try to educate yourself independently on what the ballot initiative is, right? You have to spend a lot of time and mental energy to figure out, what the issue is and what are the pros and cons of each issue. So it's a lot easier to just default to, okay, well, what, are the ads saying? Right? And again, those are often paid for by outside money. So if you are not going to spend, or cannot spend lots of time and energy, really analyzing the issue. And like, I'm a PhD in political science. I don't spend lots of time, analyzing the language of ballot initiatives, right? We don't have time for this. And so, again, it's easy to default to, okay, I'm going to take the ad at face value.
Yep. My other read, again, and I'm not, this is not scientific for me. You're the professor, you're the expert here. I'm just a talk show host. But my further read of this issue, again, in this state and across the country, is that more often than not, I think it's fair to say that, and if I'm wrong, you can disabuse me of this notion, but more often than not, it seems to me at least, that these ballot initiatives are oftentimes about shrinking rights, not expanding rights, about shrinking rights, not expanding rights. Here again, another way in which poor people and marginalized communities and people of color end up being disenfranchised.
Yeah, I think the exception that we're seeing to that, and that's not even really an exception, we've seen kind of in the last year and a half these ballot initiatives around reproductive rights.
Sure.
But even in that, you see both ballot initiatives trying to restrict reproductive rights and ballot initiatives trying to expand reproductive rights. But I think you're right that oftentimes they are framed in a way that does restrict rights, or and often, I should say, like, you don't even realize when you're voting on it necessarily that it would make a policy more restrictive, right? Because to do that, you would have to know what the current policy is. Right? So I think about, like, in Ohio, we voted on like drug policy, right? And what should be classified as like a misdemeanor versus a felony, right? And so to vote on how we should change that means you have to know the current policy to know whether it would become more restrictive or looser in policy, right? Yeah. So again, it can be very tricky, right, if you don't know the ins and outs of the policy.
When we come forward, I want to completely flip it now. Speaking of tricky, I want to get tricky and just completely flip this conversation. You've heard my argument about why I am troubled by the increasing use of these ballot initiatives and referendums all across the country, because too often they marginalize people of color and poor people. They exploit people. They use games to trick you into voting yes when you should be voting no. As I said a moment ago, oftentimes they're about shrinking rights rather than expanding rights. Because I'm good at playing both sides of the aisle, let me do this. Now, the flip side of this argument is that the ballot initiative process, if treated justly and fairly and used properly, is really about the power of the people. So you elect people who don't do their jobs, or you elect folk who do stuff. Barack Obama famously once said, just don't do stupid stuff, right? You elect people who do stupid stuff, then the ballot initiative process, the referendum process, becomes a tool that gives power back to the people. That's the flip side of my own argument. I want to see how that lands on Professor Whitesell when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Interrogating and unpacking.
That's what we do around here.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
What is dedication?
My biggest fear in the middle of my addiction was that my kids wouldn't have a father. And I started thinking, you know what? This isn't my story. I definitely had to become a better man to be a better father. It's important to me that my kids are empowered and truly believe that if they can think it, they can do it.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Joey from Vermont, a farmer trying to get through the winter. Adriana from South Carolina, a single mother living paycheck to paycheck. Liam from Ohio, an injured father struggling to provide for his family. Hi, I'm Shanola Hampton, and I support the Feeding America network of food banks because they help provide over 6 billion meals to people in need each year. Learn more at feedingamerica.org.
KBLA Talk 1580, I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. Join us tomorrow for Freedman Fridays with Cam Howard. Plus, headlines, trending topics, and your phone calls only on KBLA Talk 1580.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks, and Pat Prescott, and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. At this year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyaudio.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyaudio.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing Charles Barkley in a pickup game.
We'll take Barkley.
Ha! First pick. Sorry, kids.
Yep, even easier than that. With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision?
Okay, here's the plan. Pass me the ball every time.
This is banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com/bank for details. Capital One NA, member FDIC.
Who do you trust to get at the truth?
Tavis Smiley.
That's who. The conversation continues right now.
It does indeed, with a professor of political science at Miami University of Ohio and Whitesell. We're talking about the power and the perils of these ballot initiatives as we move through this election season. Increasingly, states like California and beyond are relying on these measures to actually get stuff done, these referendums, and I'm frankly troubled by it, but that's just my take. So I made the argument earlier about why I am so debilitated by this process. Let me flip my own argument, Professor Whitesell, and get your read on this. So here in L.A., for example, in California, but certainly L.A., we've passed measures in the past for things like raising money to do more on the houselessness or the homelessness issue. I think that's a good thing, that people were compassionate enough and cared enough about the issue to pay more of their hard-earned money to deal with this crisis here in Southern California. We talked earlier, of course, about the way this initiative process can be, frankly, the tyranny of the majority. But when people are compassionate enough to say, I'll willingly give more of my tax dollars if we can address this issue of homelessness, that's a beautiful thing. And that is an example of how the people are empowered because the legislature didn't put enough money behind this particular issue. So I'm arguing against my own frame. But your thoughts about the power of this process versus the peril of this ballot initiative process?
Yeah, I mean, I think historically what we see with ballot initiatives is that they're typically used on issues where the legislature is not acting, right? Where public opinion has moved faster than the legislature. So, I mean, recently, reproductive rights is a good example of this. Mm-hmm. There are legislators who are not willing to enshrine reproductive rights, but the voters want to do that, right? And so they're taking it to the ballots. We've also seen this with like marijuana legalization. Mm-hmm. As public opinion has changed on that, right? People have pushed for that. Even though lawmakers seem to be very reluctant to touch that issue. So I do think it is empowering in the sense that, when you feel like the people you have elected to represent you are not listening to you or not being responsive to your needs, that is a way for you to have your voice heard.
Yep. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Professor Ann Whitesell, I want to ask her, all things considered, or put it another way, on balance, whether or not she thinks this ballot initiative process is serving the demos well. Are we being served well in this country across the board by this process that is being increasingly used by all kinds of folks in states from California to the Carolinas? Our remaining moments with Ann Whitesell when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
For all the freedom-loving folk, this is Tavis Smiley.
I feel like freedom. If you're like me, 60 and retired, making ends meet, especially here at the supermarket and drugstore, is tough. I'm so blessed to have found benefitscheckup.org. It's a free and confidential website from the National Council on Aging that connected me to $1,200 a year in programs that help pay for food, medicine, utilities, and more. Maybe it can help you. benefitscheckup.org.
My daughter was diagnosed with a rare malignant rhabdoid tumor on the spine. They sent her straight to St. Jude. My hope was gone. But when you get there, everyone's like, hey, we're not going to give up. And when you see other people not giving up on your child, that makes all the difference in the world. When I found out I didn't have to pay, I was just grateful. They saved my baby's life.
Finding cures, saving children. Learn more at stjude.org.
Watch out! You got me!
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Tavis Smiley and Professor Ann Whitesell. We have talked in the time that we've had about the good, the bad, and the ugly of this ballot initiative process that we use in states all across the country. I guess the question is whether, on balance, you think we are benefited by this process.
Mm-hmm. I think you have to take it in context with everything else that's happening in politics, in particular with gerrymandering, I think. So I think about, I live in Ohio. Ohio is like hopelessly gerrymandered.
Mm-hmm.
The state is probably 55-45 Republican when you look at the voters, but the state legislature is about 75 Republican and 25% Democrat. And so there's like nothing happening in the state legislature that's good for Democrats. But you do see through ballot initiatives that there are even more moderate things happening, maybe not progressive policies that are passing, but definitely more moderate policies. I mean, we saw in Ohio in November that the voters protected reproductive rights, right, which never would have passed in the legislature. So I think, given that context, right, the ballot initiative gives hope to people in states where they feel like they have no voice. I do feel like there's a lot of pitfalls with it. Right? There is obviously a lot of information that people need to have when they're voting, and there's a lot of manipulation that can have. But given kind of the inactivity that we often see through legislators, the ballot initiative does provide a voice for people.
Yep. My extra question here, are there ways in which you think that people of color, those who are marginalized, you mentioned earlier, can take better advantage themselves of this process? And put another way, does it always have to be the tyranny of the majority?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think one of the most powerful things is coalition building, right? Whether that's, to get things on the ballot, so building coalitions to get certain policies that you want to see on the ballot, or building coalitions to get people to vote one way or the other. It's very powerful to build power locally, and so I think a lot of work can be done within communities to kind of combat the influence of outside money, just starting small within your communities and informing people in churches or community groups, and that can actually really help kind of dissuade people from voting based on what they see, just based on ads.
Yep. Finally here, this is a big question, but I know you can handle it. You mentioned money in our politics, and we discuss that all the time around here in a variety of ways. As I said earlier in this conversation, Jess Unruh once said that money is the mother's milk of politics. I think he was right about that. Given how fractured we already are politically, and given that we know who the two presumptive nominees are going to be, I'm wondering, and this may be counterintuitive, I'm wondering whether or not money is going to play as big a role this time around at the presidential level as it typically has, given that we know who these combatants are. I'm not sure that any amount of money changes anybody's mind about either of these guys. So to what extent, again, it may be counterintuitive to suggest this, but to what extent do you think money is going to have the power that it typically has in presidential races?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point. If you haven't made up your mind yet about what you think about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, then I don't know how much money it would take. Yeah. But I think the place that money matters is convincing people to turn out for like down ballot elections, right? So maybe, your House representative or some other ballot might be more compelling based on the amount of money in that election.
No, we shall see. It's going to be an interesting year. And we are bracing ourselves for effects, strapping ourselves in. It's going to be one of those years. She is Ann Whitesell, professor of political science at Miami University of Ohio, a scholar, as you can tell, in American politics. Professor Whitesell, good to have you on. All the best to you.
Thanks. Just
getting started on this first day of Black History Month. That's hour one. 2 more great hours to go. You're listening, and I'm glad about it, to Tavis Smiley.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A Pennsylvania man is behind bars after allegedly beheading his father and showing the head on YouTube. Cops believe Justin Moan beheaded his 68-year-old father, Michael Moan, on Tuesday and then showed it in a YouTube video in which he complained about the government and called his father a traitor. Moan was arraigned early Wednesday and is being held without bail. Fulton County's district attorney and the prosecutor investigation that includes former President Donald Trump claims